It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means. Live TV filled with disasters. Yeah, baby. This week, starring special guest star Mr. Jeff Freundlich. Yeah.
This is so cool. I'm seeing all these people, I'm seeing names, and these are people that we've signed music from.
Yeah.
That's pretty
they
cool.
Had
Hey,
no
Sherry.
Idea, they had no idea you were going to be on the show.
Wow.
I'm glad you can read that because I can't from here. Anyway, yes, this is Jeff Freundlich. He's a dear friend of mine and a longtime friend of Taxi's. Our two companies have worked seamlessly together now for probably close to 15 years.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Jeff's the co-founder and COO of World Music Publishing, which is the parent company of the boutique indie record label Fervor Records, and home to numerous ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC publishing affiliates. He's one of the very best and most ethical business people I know, and he's also highly skilled at creating music himself, although you wouldn't know it to look at him. He doesn't look like a musician. Under the guidance of Jeff and his business partner, David Hilker, the company's catalogs of music and videos are represented in 38 countries internationally and can be heard daily in hit TV shows, major and indie films, ad campaigns, and new media initiatives around the globe. With the primary intent of increasing the value of copyright, yay! Fervor Records is perpetuating the legacies of artists and songwriters of yesteryear and launching a select roster of current artists as well. Jeff has signed countless Taxi members over the last 15 years, and I've never heard anything but compliments about him personally and his company. Let's see, 5 years ago at the Road Rally, Jeff told me that they'd paid out about $100K in upfront like buyouts to Taxi members the previous year. We're up to about $350K, he tells me now, give or take. It's a rough guesstimate. Can't even begin to imagine how much income our members have made in aggregate over the last 15 years because of the enduring relationship our two companies have, in fact, enjoyed. So to let you know, I wrote this, I already told you, to let you know what a stand-up guy he is, he actually flew out here to be on the show. That's a big deal to me anyway. He actually flew out here one time, remember that, the court case?
Yep.
We had a member that just went, he went nuts, and I needed Jeff to fly out here, and he actually went to small claims court with me. Like many boutique companies with limited time, Jeff's company doesn't have the time to listen to a bunch of unsolicited material. They need to spend their time pitching. So please don't call or email them. I know that like a couple thousand people at least will see this show after the fact, but he seems like an accessible guy. Actually, there's a wall around him.
There is a wall. It's hard to get through to me.
Anyway, so among many other things, Jeff licenses vintage music when somebody is doing a film or a TV show and they need to put viewers in a certain time, like an era. They use vintage period music to make you feel like you're actually there. And it's surprising how many people we found and handed off to Jeff that have great music that they've recorded on a TAC 4-track or even like an 8-track cassette machine that somehow these guys are magically able to resurrect, make it sound good enough that they can put it on the air. While others see it as a pile of garbage, this guy sees it as gold and has done really well for a lot of our members. And right now it says interview starts here. Oh, but not before. I hold up the signs because otherwise Bria will kick me under the table. There you go. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe right down there in the corner. And share it, even if your friends are imaginary. Just go ahead and share it anyway. So with all that said, tell our viewers why actual vintage music is more desirable than music that's been recorded recently where people try to fake it and make it sound old. Is it a psychological thing? Is there a certain patina that it's got? What up?
It's a variety of things. So first of all, think about it if you were you were hired to direct an episode of NCIS, as an example. Okay, so this is your big shot.
I wouldn't be sitting here with a guy like you.
Right, yeah, no kidding. And so this is your big shot.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is your baby. So you would rather have the most authentic, 48 minutes of television that you can possibly create and not cut any corners if you had that choice. So while there is a market for recorded music that sounds like it came from an era, the preference of a director or a producer or a music supervisor who is influencing a director or a producer is to get the real deal. A lot of times they're temping with the real deal and they fall in love with a James Brown track, but they can't afford a James Brown track. Or maybe they can afford a James Brown track, but the estate doesn't sign off on it. Or maybe the publisher says yes, and for whatever reason, the record label doesn't get back on a quote request. Well, if it turns out that they can't use it, they're going to come to us and say, okay, well, we need soul music from the 1960s. Or maybe they need rockabilly from the 1950s. Or maybe they need crooner or big band because they can't afford a Frank Sinatra track, or the union reuse fees are way too high, right?
That one's got to be a big issue a lot of times.
Yeah, so think about it. I mean, Count Basie Orchestra, not only are you licensing the master recording and the publishing, but then somebody's going to be on the hook for these reuse fees. And if there's 20 guys that performed on a particular composition or on a particular master, well, the union's gonna be calling up production and saying, hey, you got to pay for reuse fees on all this stuff.
That would be huge too. On a band that size.
So our value proposition is that we can license music at a reasonable price to make a show as strong as possible by keeping it in whatever moment or era that they're trying to reinforce in a setting.
So many of our members have asked us over the years when they see the listings we put out for you guys, and now there are other people that are trying to copy you, but in a small way. They couldn't possibly catch up at this point, which I'm sure has to be comforting to you, and you deserve that because you had a brilliant idea, worked really hard, and made it work.
Thank you.
And this guy he's harder working than James Brown is, because he's one of my friends in the industry. I could literally call him at 11 o'clock at night and he would have finished his regular day of work and will be in the studio making music.
Yeah, I mean, all of us, there's a team. It takes a team to realize the dream, and certainly I'm appreciative, but there is such a large group of people just to kind of make us look good and to fulfill the needs in the marketplace. And it's everything from A&R to digital restoration to metadata to legal. I mean, it's a huge undertaking, and both Dave Hilker, my business partner, and I are extremely proud of what we've built, and the ability to perpetuate these legacies and get money in artists' pockets and writers' pockets,
and do it ethically.
Do it ethically. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of sleazy people in all industries. Music industry seems to have cornered the market some days, but I've never had anything but compliments about you guys. But what was my question? I was asking you something about, people wonder, why can't you just knock off something that sounds old? So about 4 or 5 years ago, Jeff and I did a 90-minute panel at the Road Rally where we played really good sounding music that was made to sound retro. Frankly, stuff that would have gotten by me as being retro. And I've got, reasonably good ears, but you can't get it by Jeff.
Yeah, we've listened to enough, both myself and Dave, that you kind of start getting familiar with, what drum sounds or drum miking techniques were used, or was that synthesizer really being used in 1973? Seems off, So you start kind of like picking up. We just listen to music religiously. It's either coming from clients or it's coming from, and they're saying, hey, we need to replace XYZ, or it's coming from Taxi, and we're reviewing and we're cross-referencing with hits from back in the day. And so you kind of just build up this database in your mind, and it makes it easier to figure out what's going to pass the sniff test and what doesn't. So.
And people would think, well, gee, the stuff is going to sound bad. It's going to have a ton of tape hiss on it. There's going to be distortion on it, but you and I once had the patina discussion, and you said, hey, that's all part of what makes it...
It's part of the magic.
Yeah.
So sometimes if we do a transfer from vinyl, we can EQ out some of that noise from the needle, and other times we can't get all of it, because if we start EQing it out, it dips into the vocal.
Right.
And we just tell our clients, look, this is the real deal. So if you want the real deal, there might be some artifacts in there, and maybe that makes it more magical. you know? And if not, then move on to the next one. And here's another piece.
Surprised I've never made this connection before, but yesterday I had brunch with a gentleman that was my assistant engineer 35 years ago. And he lives out here, has forever, and he's like the head guy of sound restoration for Warner Brothers.
Oh, very cool.
And I should introduce you guys.
Yeah.
You know, if nothing else, you both have a deep appreciation for that, but there may be a time where you have to reach out to him and say, what would you do?
What would you do here? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so when you get old music, let's take the James Brown example. Now, obviously, half the magic or more of James Brown is the fact that it's James Brown. It's the song, it's his unbelievable performance, and the rest of it, of course, is the sound, the production, the time period, the vibe, all that, you know, the fairy dust part. So now, if you get a song from me, and I'm 60, or let's say 70 years old, and I've got something that sounds like James Brown era, and it sounds authentic because it was recorded back in, let's say, 1957, but the song is B plus, as opposed to James Brown A plus. Are the people that you deal with in the industry, they're satisfied with something that's B plus or A minus, where the song isn't a known hit or may not be as good as the real deal, but the vibe and authenticity factor is so high that it makes up for it? Is that how that works? I
think it depends. I mean, we're really just looking for great songs and songs that are representative of an era. And the rules that we look at for new music are the same that we look for period music. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. Does the tonal center of the chorus lift? Is something, these little things that as a fan we think are magical are really just tools in the toolbox of a good writer. So we'll certainly turn down period music if it's not a good song, right? If the vocals are really pitchy, we're probably not going to sign it. You know, especially like doo-wop. I mean, everybody better be singing in tune, on time, in meter, in a doo-wop group, you know? There's leniency for maybe psychedelic rock, you know, from the late 60s, right? And maybe things are a little loosey-goosey, and that's okay. Or the Rolling Stones made a career out of being loosey-goosey, right? I mean, so that's okay. So it's really kind of song-specific and era-specific. Would we take a B+? Probably, or we'd at least have a heated debate about it.
Right.
Dave and I sit across the desk from each other. All music submissions that we get from Taxi go to Jacob Nathan, who is our creative director of A&R, who is a stand-up guy and a great communicator and somebody that can kind of do a first pass and separate some wheat from the chaff. And then Dave and I will sit down and we will listen to every single piece of music that Jacob sends our way. And a lot of it is from Taxi. And we will debate the merits and the demerits of each song. So, and we'll usually know within about 15 seconds. And that is the cold, hard reality of this business. If you haven't won us over in 15 seconds, you probably lost your chance.
That's the entire industry.
That's the industry.
And I understand that hurts people's artistic sensitivities, and it's a very emotional thing because, I put my heart and soul into this, and you've determined my fate in 15 seconds, but you do know.
The thing is that if you've got to wait to hook me at the bridge, it's too late. Right? I mean, 2 minutes in, it's too late. And maybe you shouldn't even have a bridge, you know? Or maybe you're not writing your bridge properly. So you really have to hook us early. And if we're judging in 15 or 20 seconds, you know, and then maybe deciding to listen a little bit longer if we like it, well, our clients, music supervisors, are probably, we have to assume a music supervisor is spending even less time than we are, right? Because the reality of a music supervisor's job, and those are kind of our primary interfaces in terms of film and TV and advertising and trailers, is that they are getting sent more music than there are hours in a day. Literally. So they are literally getting more than 24 hours of music to listen to a day. So you better send the right stuff, and you better be right about it, because if not, you're not going to get listened to, because it's just too overwhelming.
One of the things that we've been asked since I started this company 26 years ago is if it's close. Because the screeners will write, you know, this is a really good effort. It's close, but it just wasn't on it. Well, why didn't you guys send it off to Jeff or to the supervisor or whomever? Why don't you let them decide? Because you could have been wrong. What's wrong with that?
So I'm glad that you brought this up because we were kind of talking about this in the hallway beforehand. There are some taxi members that I have a good relationship with that I've known for years and years, and every now and then they'll say, hey, XYZ, this XYZ song was not forwarded by taxi for a listing. Can I just get your ears on it? And because these are people I've known a long time, I'm more than happy to, in my brief spare moments of time, take a listen. And 99% of the time, I will say back to them, hey, this didn't make the grade. I can hear it. It's like these vocals are pitchy. It's like, or the vocals aren't selling it. The vocals could be in tune, but if the performance isn't compelling, who cares?
Yeah.
So, and I'm just kind of blatantly honest. So I've actually found that the taxi screeners are fair and accurate. And it's hard because we're dealing with music, which is emotional. It's a human thing, right? We're not creating widgets like pencils or, sticky notes or whatever. So it's hard to hear that something didn't make the grade. I get that.
And after you break their hearts, after we break their hearts, then you confirm that we broke their hearts appropriately. They all call us up and say, wow, you guys were right.
Well, I've just
never
found,
happened, not once.
I just find, honestly, that if you're truthful about it, one, I can sleep better at night if I'm truthful about it. Because if I mislead somebody and they keep making the same mistakes over and over and they're spending money in a recording studio and they're just kind of like going down this financial rabbit hole, I just don't feel good about that, on the personal level, too. But two, you won't get better unless you actually get the honest, critical feedback. And nobody's perfect. And, maybe the thing to do is maybe you're a great writer and you can't sing. So maybe you should be co-writing with somebody that is a good singer, or maybe you should be hiring a better vocalist or somebody that can actually emote in the way that would do justice to the song. Because at the end of the day, you have to serve the music.
That's part of the beauty of the Road Rally. Our annual convention, for those of you who've never been, is that members who are strong in one thing meet members who are weak in another. They tend to find their equilibrium. They pair up, they collaborate, and make something that's better than either of them could have done on their own.
Yeah.
And I love when I see that happen. Let's talk about probably my favorite success story in the history of this company. You know where I'm going.
It's got to be Pete Sevo.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is such a great story, and I'll be lucky if I don't start crying as we're talking about this, because this is what gets me out of bed, and I know that you feel the same way about him. It's just, we're both so fortunate to have met this man. So why don't you go ahead and tell the story?
So we had run a listing years ago with Taxi. We were looking for 1950s kind of big band, crooner, jazz. We get a bunch of submissions from a guy named Peter Sevo. And I call him, nothing, fine. 3 weeks later, I call him, fine, nothing. I email him, nothing. And this goes on like maybe every 2 or 3 weeks for years, right?
I mean, literally, years, if memory serves, it was 3 years.
Yeah. And then you and I are having an offhand, conversation or whatever, and turns out that Pete is in his 90s and doesn't hear his answering machine well. And so it was just kind of like coming out garbled. But his son, who was in his 70s at the time, Pete Sevo Jr., heard the message and finally got us in touch with his dad. Yep. We signed a handful of songs from Pete. Really, we kind of ended up signing most of his back catalog from the 50s through the 70s. And the guy was just prolific. And 40s, I should say. Actually, I think the earliest we have from him is 1946. He got out of World War II, and I think by 46 he was writing and recording. And
he told me that one of those things, or some of them, were actually recorded in one of those booths that you go to at like a county fair or something, on a boardwalk somewhere, where you walk in and with your guitar and you sing in a booth, and he actually did some of it there.
And he's phenomenal, and he was a great writer, and he was so emotive, and what he was doing was so representative of that era, and he captured that moment so beautifully. And he is one of our most licensed artists. He's been on Girls on HBO, numerous cable TV shows, numerous network shows. I mean, I would say there's a couple taxi members that have done phenomenally well through us, and one would be Bob Kelly, who's a Rockabilly Hall of Famer, who lives outside of Las Vegas, and he actually wrote hits for Gene Vincent, and his collaborator Jay Ramsey actually has a gold record with Elvis Presley, believe it or not.
Wow.
Bob Kelly would certainly be one of those guys, and Pete Sevo, of course, would as well. And finally we got in touch and signed everything. And
he's still alive. He's got to be. Did you tell me recently you think he's 97?
Yeah, I think he's about 97.
Is that mind-blowing? A 97-year-old. I actually called Pete one day because I interviewed him for the Taxi newsletter, and I said, Pete, I'm just so unbelievably proud of you, and it's got to be great, in your retirement years, having this extra income. And he actually used a little profanity, if I remember correctly. I don't give a blankety blank about the money, young man. It's all about the fact that for years, all I ever wanted was for people to hear this music.
Yeah.
And now, because of what you and Jeff have done for me, millions of people have heard my music. He started crying. I was crying. But,
it's awesome. Go to iTunes and look for Pete Sevo. We have a compilation of his out from the 1940s through the 1960s, and
SIVO.
Yeah, SIVO, and the music is brilliant. It really is.
He's such a good guy. He's such a pure musician. He literally does it for the love of wanting other people to just appreciate his art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just and I lost track. It's 16 placements. It's got to be.
Oh, it's way more than that. It's way more than that. Yeah.
He's living the life at 97 that anybody else would be jealous of.
One of the, when we started going in this direction with vintage music, we knew that there was kind of a need for it in the marketplace, just from talking to clients and kind of putting feelers out. And the thing that my business partner and I didn't anticipate was kind of like this amazing feel-good thing that happens when you tell like a 80 or 90-year-old person that music they wrote in their 20s is going to be on TV, and it's a time warp, and it really takes them back to that time, and they start telling stories. And so, like, is it okay to indulge maybe on a quick little story here?
Absolutely.
So Bob Kelly, who hopefully is watching, Bob grew up in East Texas during segregation, and the radio stations didn't play back then what were called race records, right? So Bob and his friends as teenagers would drive to an abandoned airfield, and they would put their cars in a circle where the headlights were all facing in. And at nighttime at East Texas, the ionosphere changes, and you can pick up radio stations that are much, much further away.
Right.
And they would play R&B songs on the radio and dance in the middle of the airfield, in the middle of all those car lights, pointed towards each other, And so, like, you start hearing these stories, and it's like, and Bob's music is brilliant. I mean, he has a hit with Gene Vincent called "Get It," G-I-T-I-T, and you realize, like, for these people that kind of lived through the early stages of rock and roll, or were there when R&B was just coming up, and how magical these times were.
Yeah.
And so we like to retell these stories. We tell them every day. We tell them to our clients. We'll tell them to anybody who will listen, honestly. My kids are probably sick. Yeah. And we just tell these stories over and over and over. And it's a way that we can perpetuate their legacy, and also teach people about, well, how did this music come together? How did this happen? Or why did this happen? And in East Texas, it happened in the most romantic way for a teenager that it ever could.
You just gave me a great idea. At last year's Road Rally, what was the name of the movie we screened?
Bang, the Burt Burns story.
Bang, the Burt Burns story. About a guy that had like 21 hits and nobody knew who he was. Like Hang On Sloopy and things that were that big. And they made a documentary that was really good. We screened it last year at the Road Rally. Why don't you and I try and get some of these gentlemen to come out to the Road Rally and do a end of the day, like 6:30 in the Grand Ballroom, where they tell their stories?
Yeah, storytelling. Yeah. I think that'd be awesome.
I think
they would love it.
People would eat it up, and it would be not cathartic for them, but make them feel so good to have a room full of other musicians going, oh, that's
absolutely
awesome.
I love it.
All right,
it's
that's
a great
our plan
idea
for this year. Let's see. Okay, so give me some examples of of how, and we're not going to spend the whole show on vintage music, just so you know, but some examples of how vintage music is used. Obviously, they're featured placements and background source, but is it sometimes just merely textual? Other times is it about the lyric because it's apropos? And it's not always in movies that have scenes that take place in the 40s or 50s.
No, I mean, we had a song featured in Logan Lucky, which was a Steven Soderbergh film,
Great
and
movie,
it's
by the way.
featured during a car chase, but it happens to be a garage rock tune from the 1960s. So why? It just worked in the scene, and luckily, a music supervisor named Susan Kent pitched it to Steven Soderbergh, and he liked it, and we made a deal, and that was that. There are a lot of scenes where it is reinforcing a setting, and it is coming out of a jukebox, or it's in a diner, and there are times when someone, so for example, we had a song in NCIS maybe like a month ago. The guy's driving a pickup truck. Well, what kind of music are they going to listen to in a pickup truck? Country. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that scene reinforcement. But and it can be modern day, or it could be a flashback type thing. It just kind of depends. Sometimes it works just because it's haunting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you take a kind of like a slow 1950s female pop ballad and put a little extra. You know, the post production will put a little extra reverb on it, and all of a sudden it works really well in a trailer for a horror film. Right? You know, so there's a lot of applications for how it works.
Do things like chord changes, melodies, they do change over time, like styles of shoes or clothing change. So are those some of the magical aspects of older music that it's not just that it was done with an older microphone or an older tape machine, but
it's the arrangements, and it's look, it's chilling when you hear doo-wop and hear all the confluence of those voices all at once in harmony singing about love. I mean, it just works. That's just a magical thing, and it feels different than a modern day love song. And that doesn't mean that a modern day love song is bad, because it's not bad. It's just different, right? And it evokes a certain feeling. And also, you know, some shows are targeted towards an older audience and an older demographic, and this could be network or it could be on Netflix, right? So so they're going to use music that attracts or reinforces a certain demographic, right? So so it works in that way too. And new music works that way as well, right? I mean, you're going to spend money on a Taylor Swift song if you're trying to attract a certain type of an audience or retain a certain type of audience. And you're going to use a Ray Charles song for a very different reason, right? So, I mean, music is part of that calculus of who are we trying to attract.
Do they pay more for a vintage piece of music? Let's say it's a broadcast net placement in a episodic drama, and a typical kind of library song with vocals or lyrics. I'm guessing would be in the $2,000 to $5,000 range for something like that, depending.
So I'll tell you,
do they pay more for vintage because it's specialized and harder to find?
So I'll tell you that like we're pretty careful about keeping a button on our pricing because there are competitors out there that are trying to emulate what we do. But what we've always tried to be as fair as possible, because our goal is to get songs in film and TV, because we're trying to build back-end royalties for those songwriters. And the best way to do that is to be fair and reasonable and not jack up prices so high that you start missing opportunities.
Right.
So, and it's worked really well. I mean, we've generated millions of dollars for our songwriters over the years, including numerous taxi writers.
That's got to feel good. I know it makes me feel good just to be part of that chain. And I've got to say, these guys send us an email for virtually every one of those placements, letting us know. And for those other libraries who are watching that don't send us emails, I'm laying it down right now, man. Send emails because we love it.
And actually, I owe you an email. I owe you guys an email. I just got the confirm today for Glow, which is a show on Netflix. Robert Simpson, who's a taxi member. I hung out with him at the Road Rally. We met for about a half an hour. We've signed a bunch of his songs from the 70s and 80s. One of his songs has a 3-minute usage in Glow, coming out June 29th on Netflix. So I'll send an email late tonight or something.
All right.
So, yeah.
Well, we always appreciate those. How hard is it for you guys to clear this stuff? Because
It's so hard.
I mean, if you think, oh, libraries get half the money, in their world, probably 60 to 70 or 80% of the people that you need, like work for hires or copyright issues, they're dead.
Yeah, so I mean, this is something we talk a lot about with writers, and actually, before they sign a contract, we really try to scare the pants off them because it's what you're signing is extremely important. And just like how when you buy a house, you need a clear title, right? Well, it's the same thing. When you acquire music, you need to make sure there's a clean title. So you need to make sure that everybody is accounted for on the publishing side. Was there fractional ownership of the master? A lot of people don't understand that legally, through copyright law, the only way that you can assign publishing is through a signature. So an email does not do it. I can't say I assign X percentage of this publishing to you, Michael Laskow, signed Jeff Freundlich. It has to be in writing. Okay. So, and sometimes writers get overly excited and exuberant when you call them and say, hey, I'm interested in your music, because they think, oh my God, it's finally happening, right? This is my moment. They feel validated. And
I know that writer very well.
So, and we have to say, okay, well, slow down. Wow, your phones are like blowing up. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
It's everybody's loving this. We're huge. We're going to be hit. So it's our job to say, okay, let's slow down a minute. Did you pay for this recording? Tell me the story. I want to hear everything. Was there some manager that gave you money for this? Did you have something in writing? I mean, we need to go through the whole soup and nuts.
Right. Did a label pay for the demo, so technically they would own
it?
Exactly.
Exactly. Or we've had instances where people conveniently forgot what happened and then ended up returning money to us later because they realized, okay, well, I was technically under contract with United Artists at that time, and I had a demo deal, and these were done as part of that demo deal, and I really can't claim ownership. And the civil penalty for copyright infringement is $150,000
per infringement.
Per infringement. Yeah. So you better be right and about owning what you say you own. And so we really take our writers through a process to make sure that they're being truthful.
I've heard you guys send guys with like baseball bats and ski masks over their house. I'm kidding, of course. I am kidding. So our members get frustrated. I'm going to talk about another thing that frustrates our members. Get really frustrated when we don't forward a piece of music because we hold the bar high for the companies we work with. And then the members get the same piece of music signed by what I would call a lower tier library, because there are libraries and there are libraries and there are libraries. Should we lower the bar?
I don't know. I mean, for us, we want to take the highest standard and be above the highest standard. Why? Because we're competing with Sony Records. We're competing with EMI. I mean, it has to be great on a variety of levels, sonically, performance-wise, the craft of the actual composition.
And now you're talking about all music, not just vintage.
Yeah, I'm not just I'm talking, I don't care if we're talking about record label stuff, if we're talking about production music. I mean, we average over 10,000 usages a year on Fox Sports, okay? So there's a reason for that. Because our music is awesome. We're not sending bad material. We're not sending B-list material.
Yeah.
If you want to have success, you have to raise the bar as high as you possibly can. And it is, I know it hurts or it's hurtful when you're not under that bar, and it's painful when you're trying as hard as you can to get above that bar. I get it. I've been there myself because I write as well. That is the reality of this business. And if you really want to have a career in this business, and it's not amateur hour, and this is not a hobby, but this is what you're going to do for a living, it's got to be great.
People get very frustrated because there are lower tier libraries that they're more interested in quantity. I think it's kind of throw it at the wall and it'll stick for somebody sooner or later, which is probably true. But there is at least one, if not a couple of websites where people can go and they rate different music libraries. And I've seen this literally 100 200, 300 times, where the libraries that I know that are the lower bar libraries actually have the higher ratings because people like them because they accept their music.
Right.
And the libraries that hold to a higher standard have only 3 out of 5 stars because they've turned people away. So if I were searching for a great library, I would go to that site and look for the libraries that have 3 stars instead of 5.
That's
because
hilarious.
invariably, the 5-star libraries are the easy ones.
You know, I don't envy being on the other side of this laptop.
Yeah.
It is hard, right? I mean, if you don't have contacts in the industry, you're trying to get better. You have a limited amount of time or maybe a limited amount of resources. It takes a lot to get over that hump. It really does. And you might have success with one piece and your next 5 might get rejected, right? And it's not like there's not some secret code, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, I know exactly what to do every single time.
That's when you pull out the secret decoder ring and it just fixes everything.
But I'll say this about taxi members, it takes courage to like commit to something, right? And if you've joined Taxi, if you're paying for these submissions, if you're open to the feedback, you're saying that you want to improve. You're saying you want to be better. And that's better than 95% of the people out there that just can't handle that process,
Those of you who are regulars, you, Rob Shirelli, Michael Lloyd, the regulars at the Road Rally invariably comment that the music they hear every year, it seems to be getting better and better and better. It's because the most committed members are the ones that come to the Road Rally and listen to what the screeners say, listen to what the industry pros say at the Road Rally, and they do get better.
Yeah, and they do.
The stuff from the average people on the street, the non-taxi members on the street versus what taxi members in aggregate are doing, you guys win. Just that simple. Okay, if you've got a killer piece of killer instrumental music, but 1 or 2 of the samples or instrument sounds are a little dated or something about just not working, is that enough to cause a music supervisor to take a pass and go on to the next one?
So let's just confirm right now. You're talking about production music to a music supervisor.
Yeah, let's talk about production music,
Okay.
instrumental. I guess let's not confuse it and make it lyrical. Let's just talk instrumental. Our members get upset with us when we return something to them, even though it's a great piece of music, and the screener says, great piece of music, and it was on target for what they were looking for. However, the synthesizer sound is just so off that it took me out of the moment. And
I think that's totally valid. I mean,
Okay.
Look, let's say you're writing a tension cue for Catfish on MTV, okay?
well, not anymore.
Not anymore, right? All right, bad example. But for another fine MTV show, you might get 15 seconds of usage in a given scene or a given moment, and it has to be perfect. I mean, they've got a million choices, right? I mean, there are a million libraries. So why would they choose the one with the bad synth sound when they can just pick up the phone and call somebody else and get exactly what they want, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it just doesn't make sense logically, right? And take the emotion out of it, right? Just why would they settle for the B when they could get an A+ from somewhere else? And guess what? There's a ton of production music out there.
A ton.
So you better be awesome. I mean, that's just how it has to work. It's just the reality.
There's a woman that we had at the Road Rally last year, a young lady named Laurel Ostrander, who is an extremely good video editor, and I had her show how she selects music and slugs it into a show.
Yeah, you were telling me about her, yeah.
She was just such an awesome teacher. I'm bringing her back. I'm opening the Road Rally with her this year because once you see that, you go, oh, now I get it. And it's not about being the most brilliant composer unless you qualify brilliant as the person who makes the easiest music to use in the show. Because that's what they want, is it works. Not, wow, more brilliant than Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, I don't think they're looking for Mozart a lot of the time. What they're looking for is, does the music connote the emotion that we're going after, right? And because the music is going to instruct the viewer how to feel, right? It's going to say, you should feel sad, you should feel bittersweet, you should feel scared.
It amplifies it.
Yeah.
Because the scene already is scary, but you can make it more scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How about vocals and song pitches? The song is great, but the vocal isn't quite right. It's like the track is good, the song is well written, melodically it's there, lyrically it's there, and it may not be a bad vocal. I've heard vocals that are technically correct. Great singer. But it's just like a little too clean. Or a little too perfect to make it.
I mean, when that happens, we're probably walking away. Because, look, we have a reputation to uphold with our clients, right? When a music supervisor reaches out, and I've got 5 songs, I've got a max of 5 that I can send to that music supervisor for a specific scene. They have to be amazing. So if the vocal's not cutting it, if it's not doing it, it's not going to get used anyway. So why would I sign it? Because I don't want to be the bridesmaid. I want to be the bride, right? I want the opportunity to get that placement. So
all these years I thought I knew you well, but
but honestly, it's like, so it really, the vocal has to be great. If you have a mediocre vocal on a great song, it's probably not going to get used.
And there are all these variations on that theme. You could have a vocal that sounds like somebody stayed up late drinking and smoking too much last night, but their vibe matches the song.
Totally.
It's gritty, it's greasy, it's down and out. And conversely, you could have a vocalist. We've had this complaint from members where I went out and hired a session vocalist to sing it. Well, she was a great singer, but it was just too clean and too technically. It lacked the emotion. The performance was there, and on a technical level, it was great, but it didn't make me feel anything.
Well, or maybe they're riffing too much and they're not establishing melody, and so they're trying to improvise without establishing what you should be locked onto first. I mean, there's so many things can go wrong.
Yeah.
It really,
And that's a great point, because our members get really upset with the screeners when they send something, when they return something to a member, and they will make a comment like, too many vocal gymnastics. But she's a great singer. Yes, she is, and we're just throwing that out there because you should know this. It's just one more part of the education. But they take such offense at it rather than going, oh, I should remember that next time.
Well, it's emotional because it's your baby, and you have to be willing to eat your babies in this industry. I mean, it's like you have to find a way to become emotionally unattached to your music and look at it with a critical eye, or listen to it with a critical ear, And if you're only playing it for your friends will tell you what they want, what they think you want to hear. And also, your friends are not experts in the business of music.
They don't know where the standard is, right?
Exactly.
And even if they knew the difference, which they could, between good or bad, good, and great, they may know that, but they don't know how it works in a scene or it doesn't, because they haven't learned that craft.
Well, and just beyond film and TV, I mean, even at our company, we get multiple sets of ears on music. Something I might really like, Dave, my business partner, might be like, yeah, but this is driving me nuts. And I'll say, you know what? Now it's driving me nuts. And that's going to drive a music supervisor nuts. Or, really, any piece of music we sign, it's getting through 3 sets of ears. Jacob is doing an initial screening, and then Dave and I are doing a screening. And then hopefully we can reach a deal with the writer and the artist and everything else, right?
So. By the way, I want to compliment you on your choice of Jacob. I've had such a long and productive and warm and friendly relationship with you that when you said, we've got this new guy joining the team, I hung up the phone and kind of quietly went, wah, 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 fearing that I wouldn't have as much, interaction.
I'm still your
with
buddy.
You.
It's okay.
You're here.
Yeah,
you showed up. But Jacob is such a great extension of you guys. We absolutely adore him. He's such a mensch, and I actually got one of the best road rally shots, photography shots of him. I sent it to him right after the road rally last year and said, send this one to your mom.
Oh, awesome.
Because he looked like a male model. It was just the perfect shot. Send it to your mom. And he wrote back and said, I did.
I'm having breakfast with him at a secure undisclosed location tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to spending a little time with him.
Yeah, so. He's a great guy. Seriously, you could not have picked a better guy for your company.
Thanks.
Because he just, it's not just doing the work, it's melding in the personalities and being face forward to the industry, all that stuff. And
he's good.
He checks all the boxes. Okay, so now we're talking about more of the businessy stuff. Just if you're paying attention, I hope you are. Do you ever take a pass on signing or working with somebody that gives you early signals that they're going to be a lot of work for you in the form of phone calls, emails, questions about, come on, you guys have had this signed for 6 months and nothing's happened yet? some people fear there's an industry blacklist. I don't know if there's actually a blacklist, but do you get that where you go, this is going to be trouble?
We certainly don't have like a running list of, it's another one from this person. But I would say that we're looking for productive business relationships, and this is true of any industry, right? I mean, you want to work with people that are agreeable or honest or not hounding you. I would say we're extremely upfront when we sign music that this is a marathon and not a sprint. Mm-hmm. So don't expect something to happen in the first 6 months. For Robert Simpson, who we were talking about before, who has a Cut and Glow, I think we've had some of his stuff for about a year. I'd say on average it takes about a year. It takes time for our clients to hear the music multiple times, and then maybe by the fifth or sixth pitch they're like, hey, I really like that song, right? Because they've heard it a few times, right? So, but going back to your question, we try to manage expectations so that we don't run into those situations.
And do they actually hear what you're saying?
I think they do, because by that time they're so excited that we've gotten this far in the conversation that I think that they're listening. But yeah, have we been scared off by people that are overly aggressive? Of course, yeah.
We've got one heading your way right now that would fit that description. I've been informed by my staff today, and they didn't even know that. They didn't think of it in terms of like, oh, Jeff's coming to the office today, but several staff members independently were telling me there's somebody that is just like blowing up the phones here, talking to staff members, even to the point where he's commenting about what a pain in the ass he's been.
You know, it's funny.
Somebody said, we forwarded him to Jeff.
This leads me into a great story. Okay, because if we want to talk about kind of the business side of how this works, okay, when we started, Dave and I together, we had credits because Dave had written for other catalogs. He had written for Fox Family. And so we could kind of parlay those credits into a conversation, but we didn't have contacts. And so an example of how to walk that fine line in the industry, I called the assistant to Celeste Ray, who was the head of music at Paramount. This is before CBS and Paramount had merged, right?
And she was fairly legendary, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and her husband was Elvis's hair cutter, believe it or not. So, but anyways, I called her assistant every 3 weeks for 9 months until finally Celeste Ray got on the phone and said,
don't ever call me.
No. She said, you have been respectful. You're treating my assistant really nicely. And she's saying good things about you. She was working on Charmed at the moment, which ironically is being reboot this year. So, but she's like, I need music for Charmed. I need it by tomorrow morning. And I'm calling you because you're playing the game the right way. And we stayed up the entire night working on a piece of music for this specific scene. We sent it to her. She called up the next day and she said, I hate this. And it was heartbreaking, right? I mean, it was just like, just keep turning the knife. And but then she called back like 2 weeks later and she said, you did everything I asked you to do. You didn't blow up at me on the phone. You weren't hounding me for a response. We have another music need here. I'm going to license something from your catalog. It ended up getting us an in good faith deal with Paramount, which means that we were all of a sudden on a list, which meant that music supervisors could license our music because we were kind of pre-approved with Paramount, right? So that's kind of an example of that fine line. And well, how you have to find a way not to be a pain in the butt with people and add value. You have to know if you're going to be in the elevator with somebody at the road rally, maybe you should think about in advance, like, hey, if I happen to be in the elevator with so-and-so, what should I say? I got lucky enough to, a couple weeks ago, Taylor Swift was doing a dress rehearsal of her tour in Phoenix, which is where we're based. And so I got to go, and actually it was really incredible because it was primarily a charity event, and there was about 2,000 kids there. She took pictures with every single kid that was at that show. It was really powerful.
And then she broke up with all of them.
Yeah, that's right. And And so, I met her and I gave her a hug and we talked for, 15 or 20 seconds. And even in my mind, I was thinking, what am I going to say to Taylor Swift that she hasn't heard before? What am I going to do to differentiate myself? And I had no grand delusions of, having some kind of business relationship with Taylor Swift afterwards. But the point being, you should be prepared, especially if you're at the road rally, and this might be your only chance to actually engage or interact with a music supervisor or a music publisher or a record company. You should be prepared. What's your elevator pitch? What are you going to say that's going to differentiate yourself from everybody else at the road rally or everybody else at the concert or whatever it is?
And it should not be, here's my stuff, but I'm working on newer, better stuff.
For sure.
That is like, it's a sure sign of amateur hour, and it's a deal killer, right?
Yeah,
there.
it's a deal killer. It's tough. Sometimes I'll be at the road rally, and because I try to go every year if I can, and every now and then it interferes with my wife's birthday, and but it's like I try to spend a lot of time in the lobby, and then when I've kind of had enough, I'll go back up to my room and then go back down. And when you're coming down to the lobby and people are putting CDs in your hand, they're not thinking it through logically. What am I going to do with the CD? What if I'm not going to be in the lobby? What if I'm going to a client meeting? Well, I'm not going to walk around. I'm not Ubering with a CD in my hand for the next.
And if you walk around with, I always tell people, please don't give me a CD, because if people see me holding one, they're going to ask me to take 100.
Yeah, 100. Yeah. So I think, and so probably like the next natural question is, well, then what should you do? I don't know. I don't have the answer to I'll just know when you do the right thing. There's no prescription for this.
I just had something stuffed in our mailbox about 3 months ago at home, and it didn't come via the USPS. Somebody looked us up online, figured out our home address, and dropped off, a manila envelope with a CD and stuff in our mailbox.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a little scary.
That's a little much.
I once got a dead rat.
Did you really?
Yeah, and it didn't go in there to eat food and couldn't get out. I mean, it was a frozen rat in a bag. Somebody stuffed it in there. It was somebody that was trying to buy the company. And
at least they froze it.
Yeah. That's what made it easier to slice. Bria didn't like that. How do music licensing companies parse out their time? And I realize you're not necessarily representative of everybody, but we're talking ballpark figures here. I wrote down, can you give us a breakdown, like, 10% is listening to music, 20% is doing the admin stuff like meta tagging or accounting, 70% of the time is pitching. Is it heavily skewed towards pitching?
That question was created for a company that only has one employee, because there's division of labor, right? I mean, we have 7 full-time employees. We have somebody that only does graphic arts for our commercial releases and manages the website. Jacob Nathan exclusively does A&R. We have somebody in Salem, Oregon, who used to work in the Phoenix office, but her husband got a transfer. She handles all of our quote requests and handles all of our contracts for when we're acquiring or administering music. Dave and I, we have tried to focus on our core competency, which is it the right music to sign? Are we spending our money the right way? Are we allocating our resources the right way? It's interfacing with clients and pitching music. So for Dave and myself, a lot of our time during the day is pitching music to clients. Why? Because we set it up that way, because we do it really well, right? And we want other people to excel in areas so that we can just focus on this piece of the business, right?
So what's your best pickup line? And I say that facetiously, but let's say that you're going to a Guild of Music Supervisors event. You actually introduced me to a person or two last time we bumped into each other at one of those, which I appreciated. What's your best pickup line? There's a supervisor over there that's in your sphere. They're friends. Let's go. You mentioned her name, Susan Kent. Mm-hmm. She's very tight with the Houlihan's, because I think she worked for John for a couple
years.
Of years. Yeah, John's had many trainees that have gone on to bigger and better things. So you see Susan Kent at the bar, and you walk up to her and say,
well, I mean, I've known Susan forever, right?
So you had to meet her.
But if I hadn't met her then, if I'm approaching somebody new, the truth is I'd probably get a referral as opposed to just cold call or walk up and introduce, because a referral is worth its weight in gold. And I don't have a lot of problems getting referrals. Like, so there's somebody that I don't know, I'm going to do a little research on LinkedIn. I'm going to do some research on Facebook, who's friends with who. And then I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to say to one of my friends, hey, or colleagues, I think I have something that XYZ music supervisor would find of value. I'm a straight shooter, wouldn't waste anybody's time. Would you mind making a referral? Right. And I would do it that way. So that's my personal preferred way of doing it.
It's the common sense right way, I think.
But if
it comes back to you too, because they would flip the favor. You would do it for them.
Yeah, of course. And we're always mutually doing favors. I mean, and this is a very small, tight knit community, and I think a lot of people in this industry do have integrity, and they want to see each other succeed, and we're more than happy to help each other along the way. And there's certainly people that I call that are clients, but I also consider them friends and colleagues, and I'll bounce ideas off them and say, am I stepping in dog poop here, or is this brilliant? And that's just part of it,
Yeah.
But let's go back to your question. If I didn't know somebody and I was reaching out to them, I would say, hey, I'm Jeff Freundlich. I'm the COO of Fervor Records. I don't know if you've heard about us, and this is what we do. We have one-stop licensing of authentic period recordings from the 1920s to present day. We've worked with MTV in the past to launch artists across their platforms. We have Rockabilly Hall of Famers and guys with gold records, and we have 18-year-olds still living in their parents' basement. I just like to find a way to earn your trust and win your ears.
That, by the way, was an elevator speech.
That's an elevator speech.
That
yeah,
was really good.
So you have to be prepared, and you have to know what to do, kind of in that moment, And quite frankly, I've probably fallen on my face a ton of times too. And when we started doing this in 2002, I used to drive out here, and half my meetings would cancel, right? Because they didn't know who I was, and I was cold calling at that time, and I didn't have referrals because I didn't know enough people.
Right.
And if you only know 2 people, you certainly don't want to ask them for a referral, because if you lose that person, then you only have 1 person left, right? So it's hard. It's an uphill climb. I mean, we still are pushing a 500-pound boulder up a steep hill every day, and everybody in this industry is. That is the reality of this industry.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because people get really frustrated that they can't get a return phone call from somebody like you, or they find you hard to get to. And it's not because you're a jerk. You're an extremely nice guy, and you're a champion of musicians, because you are one. And that's true for, guys like Bob Mayer, so many of our, industry friends. They are the same as the people they sign. They just branched off into a different aspect of the industry, but they appreciate where they're at. They just don't have the time, because you're busy pushing that boulder.
Honestly, we're pushing the boulder every day, and I have a fiduciary responsibility to the songwriters whose music they have entrusted me with making them money and earning them dollars, and my primary focus is on them and getting their music placed. And if you happen to break through and get signed by us, the same applies to you, and you are part of that group. And every day I got to bust my butt to make you money, because you trusted me with your music.
That's the difference between an A library and what I call the trailer park libraries that just take stuff in mass numbers. The quality bar is lower. They make you. There are some companies out there that are asking musicians to do all the data entry, the meta tagging and stuff online, and I've gotten calls from members like, why didn't you tell us that this company was going to make us spend an hour and a half per song doing this stuff? But Group A, Group B. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're about 7 minutes away from taking questions from you guys, so you can start posting them, and Bria will write them down and feed them to me. I remember you dishing up a killer quote at the Road Rally a few years ago, and it was about trust. And you said, it takes years to build trust, but only seconds to destroy it. That was such a great quote. Let's talk about that musician etiquette. We've touched on it a couple times today, but the fine line of being graciously pushy or just pushy,
Yeah.
How do they learn that?
Look, everybody's going to fall on their face a couple times. That's just part of learning. And I can't there's no secret sauce. I think everybody has to find their own way to be the best version of themselves when they have that opportunity, and it's kind of weird because if you're overly anxious and you're trying too hard, it's kind of like a turnoff, right? And I think
it's
you kind of
bad dating.
Yeah, it's bad dating, and you almost have to kind of look at it that way. And I think if you were to practice, the way to practice would, literally stand in front of the mirror and try it out on yourself or videotape yourself, right? And see how you sound.
Is that like kissing your stuffed animal
yeah.
before a date when you're 15?
Well, yeah, it is. I know it sounds silly. We do a lot of like role play like that at work. Like, so for example, if we're pitching music for Fox Sports, Dave, my business partner, will play a track, and I'll say, "Greetings from Safeco Field. Today it's the Seattle Mariners versus the New York Yankees in a 3-game series." Well, why? Because we're practicing to see if the music works with the scene or the tone or the pace of what sports is all about, right? Well, it's the same thing. There's a cadence to meeting somebody new for the first time, and there's a way to conduct yourself, and that takes practice, and that's a totally different skill set than writing music or whatever. And if you don't do it well, then find somebody that does.
But that's a great point, because some people are born with the ability to do it. Other people, it has to be more of an acquired skill, a learned skill.
You know who's really good at it?
Who?
Taxi member Bill Gordon.
Yeah.
That guy is as cool as a cucumber. I love that guy. And you just feel like you're talking to a guy, like it's not like this regimented, like tense, like stiff,
right?
It's just like, hey man, I
gotta tell you guys, if you've ever been to a road rally, you've met Bill Gordon. He's the guy at the head of the registration line that goes, "Next, okay, over there to position number 1. Bill Gordon volunteers and does that for us every year. He's part of the family here, and he's just inherently smooth.
It's inherently smooth. And it took about 5 years for me to convince him to do a project for us.
Wow.
And he did. He did an incredible jazz trio. And actually, it's available on iTunes, so go look up Bill Gordon on iTunes. And we got him 2 placements in The Glass Castle with Woody Harrelson. He's been on numerous TV shows like The Mindy Project. We've done really well by him. So he's such a talented guy, too.
Follow-up etiquette.
Okay.
This is a question that's been around since the dawn of the music industry. Okay, so I just found out that my music was forwarded to you by taxi and people because of Google. We used to actually tell everybody up until a couple of years ago that your music was forwarded to your company or Atlantic Records or wherever, and it became so problematic with people Googling and getting too much information on people. And then we had a Bonnie Greenberg incident where somebody reached out to Bonnie Greenberg on her home phone. We just had one with a music supervisor in Canada about 2 or 3 months ago, where the member called this woman on her home phone, and then I think, if memory serves, bitched her out. It's like, yeah. And Bonnie Greenberg called me and said, "I will never, ever, ever, ever again," or maybe it's Kathy Nelson, but it was somebody, like one of those top
big
tier,
shot.
Yeah, very big shot. And they said, "Never again will I run a listing with your company," because a member tracked them down, called them up, and was like, "Well, why aren't you using it?" Even if you did that in a nice tone of voice, like, "Why aren't you using it?" They don't want to get that phone call at home. They don't want to get that phone call at work.
Ever. I can't speak for other companies. Anything that's forwarded to us genuinely gets listened to. Mm-hmm. I don't know what other companies do. I don't know what their process is, but we will call you or email you if we think that we can do justice with your music. If it might be the greatest piece of music in the world, if we don't think we're the right company for it,
right,
we're not going to reach out. Right. So, we have some like really good avant-garde jazz. And was it a mistake for us to sign it? There was actually one was from a taxi writer over 10 years ago. And it's this incredible fusion piece. In some respects, though, I regret that we signed it only because we've never gotten it placed, because fusion really doesn't come up for film and TV, mm-hmm. right? It's usually more traditional jazz, or it's cool jazz, or maybe it's like bop or something like that, right? And it just so happens that this particular piece of music that is so representative of the 1970s, it's just not asked for a lot, right? So we've learned from that. Well, why would we sign it if we can't? We want our reputation to be as good as possible, right? So, and this is on the library side, actually. This is not on the record label side where we're, doing marketing for the artist and commercially releasing and XYZ. And so it's a good lesson for us, right? Well, why would we sign music if we really couldn't do anything with it? Because the writers and the artists are just going to be frustrated. That's their baby, right? So,
well, they do get paid up front.
Well, of course, yeah, but even so,
yeah.
But I mean, we're signing it because we believe in it and we think we can get it placed and do something with it or be a springboard for somebody's career in a meaningful way, So, I mean, the work begins after we've signed it, right? So an artist might think, oh, well, I'm done now. I signed it and I'll just do the next thing. But for us, we've made a financial commitment and we've said, well, we think it's more important to sign this piece of music than this piece of music because there's not an unlimited amount of money. And so if we're not exploiting, and I mean exploiting in a good way by syncing the music and getting it placed, then we haven't really done our job,
Yeah, you're right. Where would you license that? I mean, it would be, that's a once every 5 years possibility.
Yeah, it is. That happens to be a slim one. So,
what you got, Bria?
Oh, here, I can get them too.
While she's handing him over, what's the ratio of what you pitch versus what gets used?
So this is something I say at the Road Rally every year, and it is the honest to God truth. We're on TV 7 days a week, and we hear no 95% of the time. That is the God's honest truth. And there are some music supervisors that say, I only want you to send me 5 suggestions for this particular scene because they don't want to be overwhelmed and they want you to curate. There are other music supervisors that say, look, we know we're going to need a lot of this type of music because there's a diner scene that they keep going back to, and we're going to need a lot of country music from the 1970s as an example. So then we'll pull a larger bucket. But even if we sent over 50 songs from the 1970s country, maybe only 7 of them will be used, right? So I think like the corollary to this part of the conversation is I think there's a fantasy amongst artists and writers that if they sign with us, there's almost like an equal distribution of placements across the catalog. But there's not, because some genres are requested more than others. And even within that genre, some pieces of music just have magic. There's a taxi writer named Craig Marsden, who is an amazing guitar player and sings like Mickey Thomas, and he's phenomenal. He had a song in The Disaster Artist through us. When somebody's looking for late 70s rock, even if we pitch 10 things, most of the time, Craig's music is part of that final consideration. Why? Because there's something magical about it. I don't know why. If I really knew, I would only sign those songs, right? There's something that works, right?
Which takes me to one of the questions I didn't get to, which is the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. That is it generally true that 80% of your income probably comes from 20% of your catalog?
It's probably... The odds are probably a little bit better for the writers out in Taxiland than 80-20, but yes, I would say that it could be 65-35. Okay. It's like I think that's a fair assessment because there are some pieces of music that for whatever reason just work. And even if we're pitching, and same examples with Craig, even if we're pitching 10 amazing rockabilly songs, there might be 1 or 2 that just rise to the top. Maybe it's the theme of the song, maybe it's the lyric, maybe because it's not about love and it's about being together, or or maybe it's it just has a killer sax line in it that just feels like it could have been Bill Haley in the Comets, or whatever it is, So yeah, there's an unequal distribution.
Fairy dust is hard to understand.
Yeah, it's hard to understand.
You can spot it, but you can't recreate it.
But I'll tell you this: if you were a writer and producer, and those are 2 different things, right? But if you're a producer of music, you will have the tools in your toolbox that increase the chances of getting that magic fairy dust. So for example, if you're going into a chorus, you probably want to think about dropping out a lot of instruments going into that chorus. Why? Because it builds tension. And then when that chorus hits, right? And it just, that's how you create the tingles on your spine, right? So I can't always, not every song is going to have it, and we recognize it as fans of music and listeners of music. But the truth is, the way that you create that magic fairy dust, I don't want to say it's formulaic, but those tools and those tricks are out there. And if you're willing to do the work and dig in, or if you're willing to analyze music on a meaningful level, right, and really study it and listen to the radio and listen 20 times and analyze how are they doing this? How are they creating this moment?
Don't you feel sorry for our wives? Because my wife and I cannot make it through a TV show without me commenting about every piece of music. Why it's there, why it works.
Now I watch TV with my wife and she'll go, "Oh, they paid a fortune for that." You know? So that's literally how our conversations go at night. So.
Yeah, at our house it's background source or feature,
totally.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
Most requested genres. And I am going to get to your questions momentarily, but you mentioned some genres just get more play than others.
Okay, so are we talking about library, or are we talking about record label type stuff? Or
let's go for library stuff, just because more of our members do it.
Library. So I would say there's a huge need for up-tempo hip-hop.
Okay.
A lot of the hip-hop we listen to doesn't make the grade because it sounds like it's 10 years old. It doesn't sound like Drake.
Right.
So they're not, the people are composing based on what they grew up with as opposed to what's current.
Which is endemic through all genres, but even more so there.
Yeah, I mean, that could be anywhere, anybody, right? I mean, we gravitate towards what we gravitate to.
It becomes part of our anatomy almost.
But that's the difference between being a composer and an amateur, right? So if you're a composer...
Great delineation.
Yeah, so, and... we get requests for a lot of up-tempo rock. We get a lot of requests for tension, and that could be everything from fully orchestrated type pieces to very sparse pieces.
Right, almost drone-like.
Yeah. And sometimes, and when you say drone, let's not assume it's like a synthesizer. It could just be guitar work that is delicately handled, that builds tension or whatever.
Really simple, but lays there, doesn't have a lot of movement, but it makes you perspire.
And for us, and I just want to reiterate this if I haven't said this, regardless if we're talking about production music or if we're talking about indie artists that we're vetting, we're just looking for great songs. We know great songs will be licensed. So we're not always thinking in terms of, well, it has to be this or it has to be that. You give me a great song, I will get that song placed. That's not an issue. The issue is finding the great song regardless of the genre.
And once again, because he just opened himself up to it, for those of you who are watching this, whether live today or after the fact, if you're going to just Google Jeff and think, I've got a great song, he's got to hear it. Everybody thinks they've got a great song, and he really, really, really doesn't have the time to be inundated. But we do run listings for these guys all the time. Sometimes the listings will sometimes Jeff will call me in like November and say, you know what, we've got budget left to spend at the end of the year. Can you put out a broad listing looking for anything great that's old?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I'm more than happy to do that right now. It's like, if it's great, send it in. If it's vintage and it's even good, send it in, because we trust Taxi and we, and we're here to sign. So
can you write that on a post-it note? Write a broad listing for Jeff next week, please. There you go. Okay, so the questions from the audience are 24-hour turnarounds the norm or the exception?
So in my book, if we get a music pitch from a music supervisor, 24 hours is too late. We're getting back to a music supervisor within an hour or two. That's why we get the cut. So 24 hours, it's probably already pivoted 2 or 3 times. Mm-hmm. And so the value that a company like us, and there's other companies out there as well, specifically as it relates to film and TV, is that because we're aggregators of music and we have a lot of music supervisors are going to call us and say, hey, you know what? We just tried acoustic blues that you sent. It's not working. We got to pick up the pace. Let's try something that's electric and let's make it more Chicago blues, and we're going to see how that works. works, right? In 24 hours, we might have pitched 3 times for the same scene. So when the question is, well, is 24 hours the norm? I would say get it in sooner and faster, and make sure whatever it is that you're pitching is dead on. I think it's very easy to get into like this fantasy delusional mode. Oh, this is almost what they want. But
and they're going to hear it and think it's so great that they're going to change their scope of what they're looking for.
The director of this $3 million episodic TV episode is going to stop everything and recut, right? Because this thing is so good, right?
Yes.
And it just doesn't work that way. So
I'm so glad you brought that up.
So we're here to serve the scene, right? Hope that helps.
Scott King asks, I had a song forwarded that has a very short 3-piece horn section. It was completely my arrangement, my instructions, and I paid them for their time. What release do I need from them, from the horn players?
So we generally ask for talent releases that claim that they have been paid once and are due no further compensation.
How do you deal with that in the context of vintage music where some of the guys could be dead?
With well, let me just finish about the talent release real fast, and then we'll go to that.
All
right. So the talent release usually will have a name and likeness clause as well. So this way, and I mean, you can call an IP attorney, and you can probably get one for $150. If somebody is signing your music, they will probably provide one for you. That's kind of industry standard that their particular legal team feels comfortable with using. At least we do that. So there's really a couple components. Hey, this was work for hire, this performance. You got paid. This is how much you got paid. You're not getting paid anymore. And we've got name and likeness, which means that if we were to commercially release it on CD, we could say, hey, horns by this guy, that guy, and the other guy, and you can't sue us for using your name in a context inappropriate. So for vintage music and talent releases, a lot of these guys have to go back to band members, or they will go to the estates of dead band members and say,
good
hey,
name for a group, by the way.
Yeah, really, and try to get sign off. And if they can't get sign off, then we'll have a very long conversation with them about what an indemnity clause is and what it means to take risk, and we'll assess risk on our side and say, hey, does this make sense to move forward even if they couldn't get a talent release from the drummer because the drummer is dead? And there's a certain amount of risk that I think is tolerable and allowable, and then there's a certain amount of risk that's not. And so we'll assess that individually on a case-by-case basis and decide what makes sense.
So hypothetically, somebody who passed away a few years ago and they played bass on this piece of music in the 60s. The wife, let's say, is the survivor, and she technically controls the estate. And she remembers that when her husband played bass on that session in the 60s, he came home and said, Johnny and I wrote a killer song today, because in his mind, his bass part was so, thematically central to the melody and the vibe of the song that he felt that he co-wrote it, although the copyright was only registered in the other person's name. So now this lady goes to the movies and she hears the song and she goes, that sounds, oh my gosh, that's the song my husband co-wrote. And she waits for the credits and she sees Johnny's name go by and her husband's name is not in there. And the next thing you get is a letter from a lawyer.
Wow, this is like, this has never actually happened.
Okay, so that was my question is,
but
does that stuff happen?
When these writers and artists start having success, you would be amazed at how people come out of the woodwork. And that's why we're really upfront about this before we sign anything. It's like, hey, well, do you have a relationship with these guys or women, or did things end badly? And we'll always say, you have a once in a lifetime opportunity here. Maybe you should share the writer's share and share in the success of what this band created, as opposed to being selfish and saying, nope, it's all mine. It's that. So you take care of these things up front so that they don't become an issue later.
I can't even imagine how much work you guys do on the upfronts to sign the vintage stuff that you do.
It's a lot.
It's got to be way more than what a normal library would do.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Wow. All right, we've still got some time. Yay. Fen Tamalonis asks, What is the first contact like when you sign somebody to your library? Meaning, you've decided to sign a piece of music and you contact them. What do you say, or what do you need to accomplish?
So usually we want the backstory. That's the first thing. We say, hey, I'm Jeff Freundlich, and really Jacob does a lot of this now as our creative director of A&R. Not sure if you were aware that your song was forwarded from Taxi. I mean, obviously we know that it was, but it's kind of a polite way to do this. And say, hey, if you have like 10 or 15 minutes, I'd really like to talk to you. We think that this piece is engaging and dynamic in the right ways, and here's what we do. Can you tell us a little bit about this music? Where were you when you recorded it? What year did you record it in? We just want to get some stories, because the stories help guide us to figure out what the next question is in terms of ownership, right? Or, oh, well, so you had managers back then, and so how did that work? Or, oh, you had a demo deal with a record label, and what years were that, and what did that contract look like? Or, oh, you were signed to a publishing deal. Well, did it cover everything written between these years, right? And so we start doing detective work. Right before that phone call, we're probably going up on YouTube and we're seeing if we can find it. Was it released by a label? We're probably going to copyright.gov and seeing if there are copyrights registered on it. And we're doing kind of all this due diligence, and then we're having a conversation. And then that usually leads to a second conversation, which is, hey, let's kind of go through the entire process, soup to nuts, of what our deal looks like, how it works, the advantages and disadvantages of doing, business with us, and what other opportunities might be out there. And if you feel really good about who we are, if there's no trust, no deal is going to get done, right? So our goal is always to operate with integrity and answer questions honestly. And if they feel good about us and they can sleep at night knowing that they've signed our deal and they understand how it works, and it's not get rich quick, and this is a marathon and it's not a sprint, and it takes time, and there's a good chance your music could be used in a violent scene and you won't have control over that. Once you've signed with us, right? If somebody asks for music, we're going to pitch that music when that genre or style is asked for.
What about in an X-rated movie?
No X-rated movies.
We had one incident in our 26-year history where a member forgot to check a box that said "Don't put it in any porn," and it ended up in porn.
Wow. Yeah, we don't do anything like that. That's not part of our agenda. And but it's like I'll tell you, the first song that I ever wrote that got placed in a TV show was the show called The Shield, which ran on FX, starring Michael Chiklis. And it was a song I wrote. It was an R&B song called My Man, and it was over a rape scene. Man. I couldn't sit down with my mom and be like, "Mom, my music's on TV," right? It was like literally, right? So, but quite frankly, I signed a deal, and I quite frankly pitched it for that scene, right? As on the business side. So the thing is that if you sign with us, there is a chance that your music will be used. It could be used over something sexual or something violent. And so, we really walk through soup to nuts what this is going to look like, because we don't want anybody having bad feelings later on.
They call us after you guys have had that conversation. We probably get, 3-4 calls a quarter from people that, and ultimately they make it to me, and the question is, should I sign with these guys? And my answer to that is, if I had music, I'd want it. There are 3 or 4 companies that I say this for, and you guys are one of them, Bob's another one of them, where I say, if I made music, I would sign with this company.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
because that. Because I know how you operate.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
It's because I know you. And also because I know you, every time I think of you playing guitar, I think of a stripper rock.
That's hilarious.
Because you once played a piece that you did at the Road Rally that was, I think it ended up in a scene with a girl on dancing on a pole.
We've done very well with kind of Sunset Strip, glam metal, Poison type stuff.
Exactly.
And so I wrote, actually it's available on iTunes, Chinatown, Taking It Sleazy. It's a great record, and it's been in a bunch of, Adam Sandler films and a bunch of network TV shows. And
his music supervisor was at the Road Rally last year. Brooks Arthur.
Oh, cool.
Was part of that movie, Bang the Burt Burns Story.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and Brooks, serious. I was like a little boy, looking up at my idol. I was almost embarrassed.
That's cool.
I melt when I meet people like that. He's legendary. Any other questions? Thank
The
you.
last one's not done.
All right. Yeah, we can squeeze a couple more in here. L. Harrison asks, when you get forwarded in the beginning of a career, forwarded by taxi, I guess, is it always the procedure to follow up email, phone calls in a diligent but respectful way?
Okay, so
We already
I think
kinda talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, if we get a forward, we do not want a phone call or an email from you, and it's not because we don't like you. It's because we're totally overwhelmed and we're all focused on our own stuff. If we think we can make money and create opportunities with your music, we will be in touch with you. So it's not a personal thing. It is quite literally a time management thing, and we just can't be on the phone 24/7 with something that was forwarded. But we'll get in touch with you if we like it.
To put things in perspective, Jeff and I know each other well. We trust each other a lot. If I were going to where he lives and my hotel room fell out, I arrived, they said, sorry, we don't have a room for you. I could call Jeff, I presume, and say, Jeff,
Totally.
can I crash at your house? And
Yeah.
you could do the same with me.
$100 a night.
Right. But I literally call him 3-4 times a year. And when I call him, generally it's under a 1-minute conversation. And that's how little time that people in our industry have.
Yeah, and I would say that's true of even if you're just looking for career advancement in general in any industry, it's like you really have to kind of be compact because people don't have time, right? So you have to just kind of get it out quickly because you got to move on to the next thing. So
it is scary how much work, not to pat myself on the back, but in a weekend, I will get somewhere between 8 and 20 hours of work done.
Mm-hmm.
In a weekend.
I know. I'm answering emails at 6 a.m., 11 o'clock at night. When I'm not checking my email, my business partner checks it because all the searches come through my email. And so, I mean, we're just kind of religious and about you have to be, if you're not first or second when the pitch comes in, they might have already found the piece of music that they want to use. So there's a certain amount of effort that is required to stay on top of it.
Brian West asks, I create music and rely on work-for-hire musicians remotely for vocals and drums at a minimum. Anything I should pay attention to in the process of library submissions?
So, to me, and it really just comes down to, is the music being served? And it depends on the genre and what you're writing for. But, if you're trying to emulate the Black Keys and you have a drummer that's in a studio, let's just say in Canada, right? And they're kind of recording and then sending you the session to dump into Pro Tools, then I think that one of the things you would want to think about is, well, are they using a kit similar to what the Black Keys would use, or are they kind of playing the song the way that, are they overly aggressive or too under aggressive? Is it really matching up with kind of like the vibe and tone of the artist that you are, I don't want to say emulating, but clearly there's a need for what's popular on the rock charts as an example. And with vocalists, and we touched about this a little bit earlier, is the vocalist over singing? Are they pitchy? If you have to use like Melodyne to tune everything, you probably have the wrong vocalist. Are they doing too many runs? Have they not established the melody? Those things matter. And are they in the pocket or are they ahead of the song? All those things really make a difference. And even in the library world, you're competing against, there's some incredible music in music libraries, and you're competing against them. So you have to assume that yours needs to be the best rock song, because not only within the library that you're signing with, but in the landscape, because that music supervisor or music editor probably reached out to 12 different companies for the same scene. So not only do you have to be the best in the library you're working with, you've got to be the best in all the libraries. That's literally how you have to think about it.
I got an email from a taxi member, I think over the course of the weekend, and it was a little heartbreaking to me because I know this guy well. You may even know him, but it's somebody who's very good, who's very respectful. He's a pro. And he said, I'm frustrated with taxi. I'm thinking about not renewing because I went through a period of not getting forwarded. Well, we went and looked at the stuff he was pitching to, and it was extremely high bar. He's a library person who was pitching at record stuff. And just because you've been forwarded to a lot of libraries, signed by libraries, and placed in shows by libraries does not mean that the music you're making is like records. There is a difference. And he was frustrated that when he does get forwarded, it seems to be going into a black hole, and you just touched on it. When we forward his stuff to supervisors and libraries, with a library, they have a process that they reach out to us and they're looking for something, but between the time when they tell us they need it and the time when you get forwarded to them, a bunch of other stuff hits their fan and they get busy and they go, okay, well, I can listen to that at any point in the future. So it may lay there on their desktop in a file for weeks or months.
Yeah.
And in the case of a supervisor, it's what you just said, which is they're getting stuff from 5, 10, 12, 15 other sources. And I know that this gentleman thinks he can see the visual of the supervisor getting the music from Taxi and thinking, this is great. You know that visual. I can see by the look on your face. But there are 72 other pieces of music. And if you don't hear anything in pretty short order, it didn't get used.
Well, and let's make it one step worse.
Okay.
The music supervisor might love it, but the director might not love it.
Right.
Right. And the director probably has final cut, or maybe the producers do. Right.
Absolutely.
So even if you could have the music supervisor advocating for you all day long, but that's not where the final cut lies. Right.
Absolutely.
So it's a really hard industry. It's hard because it's emotional, because music is emotional. So it's different than, making pens or whatever, So, Bic pens, their goal is just to like have this soft blue pen that works really well, and you can buy it for like 69 cents. Music you pour your heart and soul into, and it's hard when you get a forward and then you don't get the placement in the TV show, but you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, right? I mean,
to them it's a black hole, it's an abyss, but they don't know. In advertising, for instance, I once I don't know if you noticed about me, but I mixed a bunch of top of the line commercials for years in New York as an audio post engineer. I would see how many changes and how many people that would go through.
Pivots.
I once figured out there was like 16 people in the chain before you actually make it into an aired commercial.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
It's really hard.
And the pivots.
But you know what? Go for it.
Yeah.
It's like, if that's your thing, just do it and take the bulls by the horn and keep getting better and don't give up and don't quit and have thick skin, because you're going to need it.
Absolutely.
And this world is cruel and indifferent. It's cruel because it's indifferent, and nobody cares about you is the bottom. It's like you have to take it upon yourself to get better, to stay motivated, to write better music, to have higher production value, to carry yourself the right way in a business meeting or when you're introducing.
Really important.
It's really true, and that's what I like about Taxi members, because I think they've kind of said, hey, I'm kind of throwing my hat in the ring, and what I'm saying is like, throw your hat in the ring deeper, take it one more level up and take it a level past that. I know a lot more about music publishing now than I did 12 years ago or 15 years ago, right? And I started doing this in 2002. And if you've been a Taxi member for several years and you're not growing as a writer, or your production value's not getting stronger, that's on you, because nobody else is going to do it for you. Just everybody needs to hear it, because it's true. And the people that I know that have been successful, whether they're writers or music supervisors or directors or somebody like you, they've all worked their tails off to continuously improve. Yeah. How can I keep getting better? How can I take this one more level higher?
Absolutely. And you know what? There's a misconception that guys like Jeff or guys like me or people like our screeners or music supervisors are trying to keep people out, that they sit there going, ha, ha, ha.
I'm trying to lift people up.
Right, exactly. We're all looking for great music because we get a thrill out of finding great music and knowing that the person who created it gets paid for doing what they love. I've never met anybody in 40-some years of being in the industry that wanted to keep anybody out. Not one. I've met some less than wonderful people, but they haven't been trying to keep anybody out. I want to mention that next week's show is Engineering and Production Tips with Ronan Chris Murphy, who's always a rock star when he's here on the show. Jeff, thank you so much for coming out
my
here,
pleasure.
man.
Yeah.
It's like the dude gets on a plane. All I have to do is say, get on a plane, and he comes. This time he actually suggested, would you ever like me to come out and be on the show? So with that, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Mr. Jeff Freundlich. We will see you guys next week for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Production at its finest.
Yeah.
Bye, you guys. Thanks for watching.